Again, good morning, Dania Beach, and welcome to our 5th annual Code Red Hurricane Expo. We have quite a few dignitaries in the room with us today, including our new city manager, Ana Garcia. We have to find her, though. There she is. Our assistant city manager, Candido Sosa Cruz. Mayor Lori Llewellyn. Commissioner Chicky Brandamarte. Commissioner Bill Harris. Commissioner Tamara James. Former Mayor Bobby H. Grace. Former Mayor Marco Salvino Sr. Parks and Rec Director Eric Brown was just waving from the back. I said Chicky. My president, Patricia Chuckerman of the Dania Beach Chamber of Commerce. And I'm going to call our city manager, Ana Garcia, up here to just say a few words.
Good morning, everyone. I'm sorry I was having a snack. I want to welcome you to the great city of Dania Beach. We're super excited to have partnered with the Chamber of Commerce and Randy Shane to put this tremendous event together. And we vow to every year make it better and better and cast a wider net to all our residents. This is a very important time of the year, and hopefully we don't get any tropical storms or any type of hurricanes, but if we do, we're going to be the most prepared city in all of South Florida. So thank you for being here. Enjoy the afternoon. Enjoy our beautiful city. And thank you so much. I'm honored to serve you as your manager. Thank you.
And I would also be amiss if I didn't introduce Katia Borde, our PR person for the city of Dania Beach, and Jessica Lozana from the Dania Beach Press. So this will all be promoted through both of them. So on to the show. Betty Davis is the chief meteorologist for WPLG Channel 10. She provides local weather forecasts for South Florida Monday through Friday during the 4 to 6 p.m. period and the 11 p.m. newscasts. Her career as a broadcast meteorologist spans more than 15 years. She doesn't look old enough. Betty spent nearly 5 years on the national scene working as an on-camera meteorologist for the Weather Channel. She has worked in several television markets, including Atlanta, Raleigh, Durham, North Carolina, Charleston, South Carolina, and Macon, Georgia. From tornado outbreaks and ice storms to blizzards and landfalling hurricanes, she has covered all kinds of weather. Betty holds a certified broadcast meteorologist seal from the American Meteorological Society. That's a hard word.
That has nothing to do with the, there you go.
And we're back on. Yay. Okay. It is considered the gold standard of accreditation in the field of broadcast meteorology. She also holds the seal of approval from the National Weather Association. She has a BS in Geosciences from Mississippi State University with an emphasis in broadcast meteorology. Betty also graduated magna cum laude, yay, from Atlanta's Spielman College with a BA in English. Betty visits South Florida schools throughout the year, sharing her passion for weather. She mentors college students striving for careers in meteorology and broadcasting, And when she is not forecasting the weather, you might find her running around South Florida trying to keep up with her husband and their 2 sons. Without further ado, Betty Davis.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me here today. I'm not sure which mic. This is the mic. Okay. Can you hear me okay? Okay, excellent. How's everybody doing this afternoon? Good. Happy June 1st. It is the official start of the Atlantic Basin hurricane season. When I was asked to do this event, I was told that Max Mayfield and Brian Norcross were not available. So I said, sure, I will come out and do what I can. It has been a very busy May for us as we have been getting ready for this day, the start of the season. I'm not sure how many of you out there watched our hurricane special that aired on Local 10 last night, Staying Storm Safe. I thought we did a pretty good job on that, right? So in watching that, I hope you were able to get some tips, or maybe your memory was jogged, some things you need to do to get ready for the season that you haven't done. Or just watching it and hearing some of the stories, maybe it has you realizing how blessed and fortunate you are compared to some of the people on the Panhandle living in tent cities still trying to recover from Hurricane Michael. So I am here today just to set the scene for where we are as we start the Atlantic Basin hurricane season, and some of the predictions we'll talk about that, and we'll talk about why no matter what's predicted, you need to be prepared for anything. So I have a presentation to go along with what I'm going to say, and there it is. Woohoo! PowerPoint presentation. Okay, which one advances? Okay, the red one advances. Okay, so we are going to start. Is it the middle one? It's the middle one. Here we go. So we're starting with the predictions from NOAA. So this is their outlook for the season. They are calling for a near normal season. You can see how their numbers compare to what you would get in an average Atlantic Basin hurricane season. So they're calling for 9 to 15 storms, 4 to 8 of those becoming hurricanes, 2 to 4 major hurricanes, so category 3 or greater, calling for a near normal season. So you may be asking yourself, what's behind those predictions? What are they looking at? Well, most notably, one of the things they are looking at is the presence of El Nino. So what is El Nino? El Nino is characterized by unusually warm waters in the eastern and central equatorial Pacific. I'm not sure if I have a pointer on this. I don't know how to use it. But this graphic is basically showing that equatorial sea surface temperatures were above average across most of the Pacific between that time frame, April 28th, 2019 through May 25th, 2019, so through much of the month of May. So the bottom line, they have established that El Nino is present. Now, during El Nino, that would usually produce conditions that suppress hurricane activity. And one of the things that would suppress hurricane activity is wind shear. When you have that increased vertical wind shear across the Caribbean Sea and the Atlantic, that's not favorable for tropical systems to thrive and really grow. Just think about those strong winds tearing the systems apart. So not a favorable environment. So the bottom line, with the presence of El Nino, you would expect that to limit development of tropical cyclones. But guess what? El Nino is being countered by the expectation of a warmer than average Caribbean and tropical Atlantic, and also an enhanced West African monsoon. So those two things would generally favor increased hurricane activity. So between that main development region and the expectation for the warmer temperatures and a strong West African monsoon, that is sort of working against the presence of El Nino, which you would expect to suppress hurricane activity. So looking at those parameters, that's a huge player in how how NOAA came to the prediction of a near normal season. You follow? Very good. And Rob Moyedo is here from the National Weather Service office. He can fill in the gaps on anything I missed. Did I kind of nail it, Rob? It's good. Okay, good. I want to remind you, though, that even in an El Nino year, you can still get hurricanes. Just think about Hurricane Andrew. How many of you out there lived through that? 1992? Hurricane Andrew happened in an El Nino year. First named system, Andrew. It goes down in history as a Cat 5, 175 mile per hour winds. So just because you have an El Nino year doesn't mean you can't get an Andrew developing out there. So that's a satellite image of Andrew, and this is the last radar image of Andrew as it came in before everything got knocked offline. So here we are starting the 2019 season. And I don't know if you realized we already had our first named system, Andrea. Believe it or not, Andrea was just like last Monday, Tuesday, subtropical system that formed Western Atlantic, southwest of Bermuda. So we've already knocked Andrea off the list. So when we get our next named system, that is going to be Barry. Let's hope we don't see a Barry, and if we do, let's hope it doesn't impact anyone. This is the Saffir-Simpson scale showing the hurricane wind speeds, how we rate the Cat 1, Cat 2, Cat 3, Cat 4, Cat 5, and of course, the major hurricanes Category 3 or higher. We're always concerned about the wind and the damage it can cause, a hurricane or a tropical cyclone can cause. But water is actually the biggest threat. It is the biggest threat. Okay. Not sure what that says, but we're going to keep moving. Everybody got that? Water is the biggest threat from a hurricane or a tropical cyclone. There we go. My PowerPoint is going a little haywire. But after that graphic, I have a pie chart showing the breakdown about storm surge and rain and where they line up with the other hazards from a hurricane. And the water aspect, particularly the storm surge, is the deadliest when it comes to Atlantic tropical cyclones or hurricanes. It's the storm surge. And the storm surge, that's produced by all that water that's being pushed toward the shore. You've got the winds rotating around the tropical system or the hurricane, and then you've got the forward motion of the system as it's moving across the ocean and it's pushing that water toward the shore, inundates the coastline, and you wind up with that storm surge. So the water is the threat that we really try to drive home. When we talk about the hurricanes and we say there's a Category 3, it has maximum sustained winds of 115 miles per hour, that's important. But you cannot lose sight of what storm surge could do to your community, especially for a community like Dania Beach. Okay. It is both. It is both, and I'm sure Rob is going to talk about this. It is the wind, too. We know what the winds can do. The winds can cause the destruction, but we think about it in the sense of you can hide from the wind, but you got to run from the water. You got to run from the water. Last night in the hurricane special, Max Mayfield talked about an example that he likes to use. If you're six feet tall, but you got 8 feet of storm surge, there's no pretty way to put it, you're going to drown. I mean, that's the bottom line on that. But But the wind, of course, that is an issue. The wind can bring down the trees. It knocks out the power. And then once the storm passes, you've got a whole other set of issues you're dealing with, especially the fact that you've lost power now. And now you've got to think about the indirect deaths. Remember that what happened to the people in that assisted living facility who lost the power during Irma? So you've got a whole other set of issues to worry about. So water is that biggest threat from the tropical cyclones. This is the graph I wanted to show you. And I pulled that from the American Meteorological Society. And I think that sort of drives home the cause of death in the United States directly attributable to Atlantic tropical cyclones. The time frame 1963 to 2012. Do you see how much storm surge and rain take up on that pie graph? So that's why we want to talk about the wind, but we cannot ignore the water, and we have to drive home how important it is to realize that the water can be deadly. So we talked about what produces the storm surge. You've got the winds moving around the cyclone, pushing the water ashore, plus the forward motion of the storm as it's coming in. And this is actually a video that I grabbed from National Geographic, and it shows just how that water is so powerful, and it just inundates a coastal area, and it's powerful and can cause so much damage and destruction. So I don't think we're going to be able to play that. But as I get ready to close, the questions you need to ask yourself: do I live in an evacuation zone? And if you do, and if you've been told you should evacuate, you should take that seriously. I wouldn't ignore it. The other question: do I have flood insurance? I know everybody in here has flood insurance, right? And if you don't, after today, you're going to make a call and talk to someone about getting flood insurance. Oh, excellent, excellent. That might be a question Rob can answer, how far inland you have to be to not be considered a storm surge area. I think the one thing...
US 1 dividing line. US 1, east of US 1, evacuation zone. West of US 1, it's that simple.
Are you in Dania Beach? Oh, okay. Okay.
Yeah, well, see, that's the difference. The difference between storm surge and flooding from rain.
Rain, yes. Yes. Yes, he will. Where was I? So, the one important takeaway, and Max Mayfield wants me to let you know this. He drives this message home every year. It only takes one. So even if you're looking at those predictions and you're feeling relief because you're like, okay, right now it looks like we're looking at a near normal season. Well, suppose we do have a near normal season. Suppose we have a below average season, but we could get that one hurricane that just deals us a mighty blow. So that is why we say don't put too much stock in the predictions. So for the rest of the hurricane season, the entire Weather Authority team is going to be there for you. Luke Doris, Brian Norcross, myself, Max Mayfield, Julie Durda, and not pictured Brandon Orr. We will be there all season long. And if you go on local10.com, you can find a lot more information about the season. And we may have a link to the hurricane special that aired. We may have a link to that already up there as well. So that sums up my... Oh, okay. Download the Max Tracker app or the Local 10 weather app. Download both of those, and that will help you get through the season. I'm going to be followed up by Rob Moyeda, so he'll plug in a lot of the gaps and talk about things I didn't talk about. We didn't want an overlap, but he can bring you a lot more information. And that concludes what I wanted to bring to you today. Let's take questions after Rob. Because he may answer some of the questions in his.
Thank you so much. I know you have
You're welcome.
I really appreciate you coming.
You're welcome.
This date next year.
I'm going to stay and listen to some.
Okay. So thank you so much, Betty Davis, for coming to Dania today. We really appreciate it. Pictures? Can all the commissioners come up for one picture with Betty Davis before we bring Rob up? Former mayors, commissioners, city manager, any dignitaries in the room, please come on up. And we now have Vice Mayor Lauren Odman with us. Welcome, Lauren. And Betty, this is our Vice Mayor Lauren Odman. Sideways, everybody. Thank you, everybody. So next up, we have Robert Molita. He is the Warning Coordination Meteorologist at the National Weather Service's Weather Forecast Office in Miami. Yes? A native of Miami, he has worked for the National Weather Service since 1991 and spent virtually his entire career in South Florida. Robert has served as Warning Coordination Meteorologist since 2005 after working for 7 years as a marine forecaster and hurricane support meteorologist with the National Hurricane Center. His career has taken him through many South Florida tropical cyclones, from Hurricane Andrew in '92 to Hurricane Irma in 2017 and those that have hit after. And every other hit and near miss during and since that period of time. He has worked in every aspect of hurricane forecasting, from assisting hurricane forecasters with data collection to writing forecasts and conducting local and national media interviews, as well as briefing local officials on expected storm impacts. As Warning Coordination Meteorologist, he is responsible for overseeing the National Weather Service Warning Program in South Florida, which requires frequent interaction with key partners such as emergency management officials and media representatives. He is also in charge of the local NWS public awareness and outreach programs, conducting weather-related information, safety presentations to many entities, including local and regional government. So does that tie in with our Code Red? Yes. So all of you that registered for Code Red, Robert will be sending you messages. So without further ado, here's Robert Molita.
Okay, got it. All right, thank you very much. It's great to be here in Dania Beach once again. I think down in the fourth or at least 4 years now that we've been coming to this, and we've been a part of this, and it's a great event. I don't just say this because I'm here, to make it sound like, but we do a lot of these community expos, normally at the city levels, and this one in Dania Beach is, it's second to none. I have to say, the number of people here, the number of people here, the number of, just the buzz in the room. I think it's really, you all should be proud of the fact that this, the city takes hurricane preparedness and just, overall weather preparedness seriously. So hopefully it will be a quiet year, but I say hopefully because, as Betty said, and you'll hear her say over and over again, we just don't know for sure on June 1 whether we're going to be affected by a storm, later in the year. So it's really about being prepared and informed. Being informed or staying informed is a huge part of preparedness. So the angle that I'm going to take in this presentation is more kind of talking about some myths that are out there as far as hurricanes are concerned and some of the information that we provide. And then to try to bring everything home at the end, including a lot of the things that Betty talked about. So one of the things that we hear quite a bit, and I'm not saying anyone here in this room believes it, but we'll hear, well, for example, there's a storm is coming, evacuation orders are issued. So someone will say, wow, I've never had flooding in my neighborhood, so why am I being told to evacuate? I'm not going to evacuate. I'll be fine. I've never had flooding before. Well, the fact is, hurricane impacts, even in an area like South Florida, that's hurricane prone, obviously, hurricane impacts are very rare for one location. In other words, you can go a couple of decades without being hit directly by a hurricane, or you can go, you can be hit 2-3 years in a row. If there's no regular spacing as far as how often we get hit by hurricanes. So we can't base our expectations solely on past experience. Our past experience can be helpful, but it also can deceive us because it's not, again, they're so rare that we do get hit, even if it's just once in a few years, that we don't necessarily always experience the full potential of what a hurricane can bring in our community, in our home. And that's because every storm has unique characteristics. Every storm that's out there has its own unique set of conditions, wind speeds, how far the winds extend from the center of the storm, how much rainfall that storm might produce, its interaction with other weather systems that are out there. It's all, it's very complex. So we have to keep that in mind and evaluate every storm based on its individual characteristics and how they might affect our area. And Betty talked about storm surge. In fact, the graphic she showed is very similar to this one. But I do want to bring it up again to really bring the point home that coastal communities like Dania Beach are susceptible to storm surge, especially as I mentioned there in the question, but I'll repeat it again so everyone can hear it. East of US 1. So I thought I had, actually I don't have the graphic of the, I may have it later, but the evacuation zones for Broward County, it's important to know that, but it's pretty simple for Broward County. East of Federal Highway is where the zones are. So Zone A, or the one that's more likely to be ordered to evacuate, is the Barrier Island. So, east of the Intercoastal, basically the beachfront. Zone B, or the yellow zone on the map, is the area from Intercoastal to Federal Highway. So that one would be ordered. That one would be under an evacuation order for normally or typically for a higher category storm. It could be for a Category 1 potentially, because there's no direct link between the category and the storm surge, but typically it would be for the threat of a higher category storm. West of Federal Highway, you're not in a storm surge evacuation zone. It doesn't mean you can't get flooding, but that flooding would be more likely from rainfall, not the storm surge, which is a unique type and very deadly, or potentially deadly, type of flooding, like what you see there on the graphic. It's basically like it's a storm tide, a very abnormally high storm tide. And Betty mentioned this, and I'm going to, I think it's really important to reiterate. The reason evacuation orders are issued for storm surges because of the particularly deadly nature of the water and the force of the water. So run from the water, hide from the wind. That's the advice that we give. And I think these two pictures illustrate that pretty well. The picture on the left is Hurricane Michael from last year when it hit the Panhandle. That was the community of Mexico Beach, right on the beachfront there. That devastation you see there, that one building is standing all there by itself with everything else in ruins, that wasn't necessarily wind damage that really caused most of that. That was the water, the force of the water. And the same with the picture on the right, that was Hurricane Ike in Texas back in 2008. Now, it's been a long time since Broward County has experienced a really big storm surge. We've had some close calls. Hurricane Irma back in 2017 did produce about a 2 to 3 foot or 2 to 3 feet of flooding, again, over the ground, right along the beachfront. In fact, this picture here is it's up to coast in Fort Lauderdale Beach, but it was probably fairly representative of what occurred down here in this part of the coastline. And that was from a hurricane in which the center was 90 miles away. Had Irma been closer to South Florida or closer to our coast, that surge would have been a bit higher, and there would have been potentially more serious impacts from that. So we are somewhat fortunate that at least in this part of the coastline, this part of Southeast Florida, the storm surge, we're not talking about 15 feet of storm surge. We're talking, even in a high-end event, probably somewhere closer to 9 feet or so, roughly. But still, 9 feet is a lot of water. And again, so we don't want to downplay the storm surge threat. So if you are in that evacuation zone that we talked about, and you're ordered to evacuate, the reason you're being ordered to evacuate is because, well, there it is right there, is because you're in one of those zones that, based on the storm surge models, and based on the science, our understanding of the science, detailed elevation studies, and an evaluation of the current situation with the storm, that there is enough of a threat of storm surge that we feel that, or at least the county officials feel that there is a need to order evacuations. And I think that's an important point to mention, is that the National Weather Service does not order evacuations. We're not the ones that tell the county, hey, you guys, you need to enact your evacuation orders. We provide the information, the possible or expected amount of flooding that could occur from storm surge, and then the county officials make that determination based off the information that we provide, and also, of course, their understanding of storm surge and the information that we provide to them from all the training and all the meetings that we hold throughout the year. So in other words, it's not like they're just totally clueless on this. They understand what this information is, and they convey that information to you. Another myth is tropical storms, Category 1 storms, they're no big deal, nothing to really worry about. Well, actually, that's not the case, unfortunately. The wind is only part of the story. So we've talked a lot about the water, and we've also talked a lot about the wind. For example, the Saffir-Simpson scale. So the wind is only part of the story. We can point at several Category 1 wind or hurricanes that were Category 1 on the wind scale that were devastating. Hurricane Harvey in 2017. That one was a huge rainfall producer. The flooding in southeast Texas was massive. 40, 50, even 60 inches of rain. Hurricane Sandy in 2012 in the northeast U.S., New Jersey, New York. Those were Category 1 hurricanes. They weren't Category 3s, 4s, or 5s. In fact, we don't even need to name a storm with a name necessarily in order for it to have impacts in any area, especially here in South Florida. If you were here in October of 2000, you may remember a big flood event that we had from a storm. It was a tropical disturbance, I guess you can call it, that came up from the south. It moved right over South Florida. It was trying to develop into a tropical storm, but it still wasn't quite there yet. It ended up becoming a named storm north of us. But as it moved over us on October 3rd of 2000, it dumped like anywhere from 12 to 18 inches of rain in less than 24 hours over much of South Florida, a large part of the area. So the flooding that we saw, those are some of the pictures from across South Florida, was pretty impressive, flooding not just like what we would get in a strong summer thunderstorm, but type of flooding that actually affects several neighborhoods and didn't just go away right away. It actually lingered in some neighborhoods for a day or two. And so these can occur with any storm that happens to have that characteristic where the rain bands just set up right over our area. So there is a messaging challenge when it comes to how to convey the threat from the different hazards of the storm, the wind, the water, and even tornadoes. So one of the challenges that we have is when the wind, let's say for example we have a hurricane out there, let's say it's a Category 3 or a 4, like for example Hurricane Florence. So use Hurricane Florence as an example. This is last September. That was a storm that hit the Carolinas. When it was offshore the Carolinas, it was a Category 4 hurricane. So there was a Category 4, getting close to the coast, and of course, people were concerned, and for good reason. But actually, the main concern all along with Florence, ahead of before it made landfall, was its potential for devastating flooding, because it was expected to pretty much stall or become stationary once it made landfall. As it was approaching the coast, the winds decreased from Category 4 eventually to Category 1. So here was a headline that was grabbed from the internet as the storm was approaching. The latest, Florence downgraded to a Category 1 hurricane. Meanwhile, all the other threats were still really, really high, especially the flooding. So think about how that might get perceived. If you're hearing, well, okay, Florence is downgraded, okay, maybe it's not going to be so bad anymore. Well, it ended up being really, really bad. And in fact, some of the rain, this is a picture of this hurricane as it was almost at landfall there in North Carolina. And that map shows the amount of rain that actually fell as the storm moved inland. Some areas had over 30 inches of rain in like a couple of days. It was a massive flood producer. And in fact, that's just one of many pictures that you can find on the internet of the massive amount of flooding that occurred from that storm. So again, we want to keep in mind that these systems are multi-hazard impacts. It's just more than just about one thing, and that the category is that category, that Saffir-Simpson scale, is only about the wind. It's important, but there's more to it. There's more to a hurricane and its dangers than just that number category. And so the term only a Category 1, when we have to be careful about that, because those figures right there, that's the amount of damage and deaths that Category 1s have done in the United States, only in the U.S. since 2010. So those are pretty impressive numbers. And some of the storms there that you see that have been Category 1s yet have done quite a bit of damage. Okay, here's a really popular one, at least one that I really tend to focus on a lot, is the cone, and we all like the cone, right? We all follow it and use it. The cone has moved past my city or neighborhood, so I'm good. Well, not necessarily. Not necessarily. And so we'll talk a little bit about the cone here as well. The cone is on a diet, if you want to call it that. It's getting smaller as the years go by. And the reason it's getting smaller, it's good that it's getting smaller because that's a reflection of the improved track forecasts. So as the track forecasts of the storms gets better from year to year, the cone gets smaller. And that's because the cone is an indication of the level of the forecast accuracy. And so because of that, the cone is not a reflection of the area of potential impact. So the impacts from a storm, especially if it's a large hurricane like Irma, for example, those impacts extend well away from the cone, far away from that cone, especially as the cone is approaching and getting close to land. And it's also important to remember that when you're tracking a storm or when you're watching the map and you're telling you where the storm is and you're seeing the track, hurricane is not a point. That line is the center of the storm, but the radius or the area of extent of those impacts can be a couple hundred miles or even more sometimes. So the cone does not take that into account. So the cone, I know the graphic's a little bit small, but I'll just kind of explain it really. The cone does not take into account the size of the storm. The cone doesn't expand or contract based on the storm size. It's actually like a one-size-fits-all. If you think of it that way, the cone is the same size for every storm that occurs in an individual hurricane season. So we don't adjust it. It stays the same size. So it doesn't matter if you have a tropical depression out there or a Category 5, the cone that will accompany the track forecast will be the same exact size. The cone represents, so that area that's inside that cone represents the area that has a 2 in 3 chance that the storm center will sit or stay within that cone. So there's a 2 in 3 chance that anytime during that 5-day forecast period, the center of the storm will stay inside the cone. Of course, that means that there's a 1 in 3 chance that at some point during that 5-day period, it could stray outside the cone. So that's another reason why it's important to not focus too much on the exact location of the cone. So here's how I kind of describe the best utility or use of the cone. So for example, let's say we're about 5 days out. There's a storm out there. In this example here, this is from Hurricane Irma actually. The storm was still east of the islands, but the 5-day cone was already touching South Florida. So what that's saying is that yes, there certainly is a threat. It's not a clear imminent threat, but there's some threat that in several days we might be impacted, or there might be a storm in our neighborhood. So that's a good time to make sure that our hurricane supplies are in order. It's not the time to come up with your plan. That time is now, of course. But it's a good time to review that plan, make sure that you have everything in order, everything in place. Maybe if there's a few things you need to stock up on, you can do those at that time. Don't wait much longer or any longer, because if you do, and that storm continues to stay on its track, then you get into this 3-day, 3 days out. The 3-day cone, the white part of the cone, if that starts coming over you or near you, then you're basically going to be, more than likely, will be under a watch very shortly after that. And that's when things really start to happen quickly as far as community preparedness, evacuation orders potentially, people rushing to the stores. People that didn't have that plan at the beginning of the year all of a sudden are rushing to Home Depot or whatever other hardware store, that get plywood and other things like that. So that's really where the cone it serves, I think, its true intention, or the purpose of why we came up with this, is to let people know that that's the area where that storm could be, the center of the storm, especially in the longer time frames. However, once a storm gets closer, let's say within 48 hours of a potential storm's impact, then it loses significance. And the reason it does is because the cone gets smaller as it gets closer to us. It gets smaller because we're more certain as to where that storm is, not 100% certain, but we're more certain as to the area where the center of the storm is more likely to be. But the storm itself does not get smaller as it approaches us. It'll stay the same size or maybe even get larger. So at this point, the cone should not be used as really our primary tool for determining what level of preparation or what expectation or what could potentially happen as a result of the storm in our city or in our neighborhood. So there's localized information that's available at the time that we issue a watch, within 48 hours, that can really help us to assess that information and get a better indication of that. And these are these maps here that I'm going to show you here in more detail here in a couple of minutes. So another one, and this is the last one, the last myth. The storm was supposed to go over Dania Beach and ended up going down by Homestead. Or, it was supposed to be a Category 3, but it only ended up being a 1, or vice versa. Well, the fact is, and actually I'll talk about this really more later on, but I'm going to give you an example from Hurricane Irma, our last real experience from a hurricane. About 3 days out, Hurricane Irma, of course, ended up being a near miss, right? But 3 days out, the center of the storm was forecast to come right over southeast Florida, right directly over our coastline. The track, I know it's maybe hard to see on that map there, the storm actually ended up tracking closer to the west coast of Florida, about 90 to 100 miles west of us. Inside the cone, however, so it still was inside that area where the center was more likely to track. So the 3-day cone, the size of the cone is about 100 miles on either side. Again, we're talking 3 days out. So when you're starting to make preparations as early as 3-4 days out, we have to understand, it's just the nature of the beast, the nature of the science, or the state of the science, is that there is still a potential for the storm to track in any direction from that center forecast line. And so that goes right to the next point here, which is how to properly assess your level of threat from the storm, going beyond the cone to get that additional information. So if you think about a hurricane forecast, like this one here, for example, the hurricane forecast here, the track forecast is that white line. Surrounding the white line, you have all these red and yellow lines coming out. Those are actually alternate forecast scenarios that the Hurricane Center runs with every forecast that we produce. Because in reality, the forecast is just a forecast, right? It's not what are the chances that forecast will be 100% to the mile correct? Probably almost zero, that it will be to the mile. It could be really, really accurate. It could be within 10, 15 miles maybe, or it could be more like an average storm, closer to 30 or 40 miles or 50 miles in about 24 hours or so. So we have to take that into account when it comes to planning. We can't assume a perfect forecast. We have to assume, for preparation purposes, that we have to assume what we call a reasonable worst-case scenario, or prepare for a reasonable worst-case scenario. I'm not saying absolute worst case. We're not telling you every storm that's threatening us is going to be the worst thing that's ever happened. No. But based on those alternate scenarios that are realistic, those are realistic but alternate scenarios, which are the ones that could produce the worst impacts, or the reasonably worst impacts for our area. So that's what we need to be prepared for. Think about Hurricane Andrew, for example. Let's go back to 1992. For a time, it did look like the center of Andrew was going to come over closer to Broward County, maybe even Palm Beach County, right? As time went on, however, as we got closer and closer to the storm, the track gradually shifted to the south over time. So for a time, it looked like Dania Beach was going to get the worst part of the storm. As it turned out, Homestead did. But the difference between those two locations from a big picture perspective is not that much. Hurricane Irma is another example where if for a while it looked like we were going to get, East Coast was going to get the worst part of the storm, category 3 or 4 maybe. But as it turned out, the Florida Keys and the west coast of Florida got the worst impacts. So they got the reasonable worst case. We didn't. It could have easily been the opposite. Could have very easily been the opposite. We can't always assume that we're going to skate by with a near miss. So that's why, in order to responsibly prepare ourselves to ensure our safety, the information that we provide when it comes to potential impacts always takes into account that reasonable worst case scenario. And these maps that are available on our website, weather.gov/Miami, go directly to conveying what that reasonable worst case threat is. So the color coding on these maps indicates the level of potential threat with a detailed description of what that threat actually is. So you put them together for a storm, that's what it would look like. And you can actually go on our website. It'll be linked on our website prominently, and you can click on there at your location, let's say Dania Beach, for example, and you can get detailed information as far as exactly what's expected, but what is reasonably possible in that reasonable worst case scenario. And I know Channel 10, they use those they take those graphics and they will put them on air also. So not only will you find them on our website, but you will see them in a lot of our TV stations. And actually, I have to say, Local 10 was the first station that actually started displaying these graphics on air during their hurricane coverage. So we're really happy about that this is getting out, because again, it's about going past that cone. The cone is good, but there's a lot more information out there that really speaks more to what we should be preparing for, what our real threats are. A couple more things before I wrap up. This one I think is a really sobering statistic. Not every storm is going to give us several days or a week of advance notice. Not every storm is going to be like an Irma or a Florence, where we're going to be able to track it for days and days, and we're going to have a lot of build up and a lot of anticipation or stress, I guess you can call it. Some are going to develop quite rapidly and intensify quite rapidly before hitting a location. South Florida could be one of those. We've had 4 hurricanes that have made landfall in the U.S. as Category 5s. So in other words, they made landfall as Category 5s in the U.S. Michael was the most recent one last October. Before that, Andrew, Camille, and the 35 Labor Day hurricane. All 4 of those were tropical storms 72 hours before they made landfall. Only 3 days before, they were tropical storms. So there's an example right there. Not every storm is going to give us, in fact, a lot of them will not. Historically speaking, in South Florida, we've had a lot of those that have not given us that much lead time. So that's why it's so important to stay aware and stay informed. Not assume that we're going to have a lot of days to get ready, because many times we won't. So another good piece of information that you can get on our website, and again, it's also conveyed by our TV partners, is when to make sure that we're ready, by what time. We don't want to fixate on a landfall time, because yes, the center of the storm might make landfall at a certain time of day, but the impacts of the storm can often precede the center of the storm by at least 24 hours, if not more, sometimes even 36 hours. So in order to help us determine when we should be done with our preparations by, we produce these time of arrival graphics, or arrival time of the tropical storm force winds, the time in which the winds are making conditions too dangerous outside to be out there doing any final preparations. So we give a earliest reasonable, again, taking into account a safety margin, that reasonable worst case scenario. So if you use the earliest reasonable time, you will be almost 100% sure, not totally, but almost, that you will be done before the conditions get too dangerous outside. Now, if you can tolerate a little more risk, if it's only maybe a couple little things you need to do that can take a relatively short amount of time, then you can use our most likely time. So there's 2, the earliest reasonable and the most likely arrival. The most likely arrival time will have a 50% chance, based on our alternate scenarios, 50% chance of occurring before or after that indicated time. So when you see this information displayed on TV as well as on our website, keep in mind that's what that information means. So of course, we always recommend that you get your information from trusted sources. And I recommend staying as local as possible, starting with the city of Dania Beach. They're getting all the information from the media and from the National Weather Service, and they're passing it along directly to you. Local media outlets such as Local 10, local officials, of course, city, and even of course the National Weather Service, in particular the local NWS office here in Miami. So you see we have weather.gov/Miami, again that's our website, and we're also on Facebook and Twitter putting out a lot of this information. So it all comes down to this right here, I think, when it comes to preparation for a storm. What are the hazards? Being aware of those different hazards, the wind and the water, for example. How might they affect my household and my neighborhood, and what actions do I need to take? If you can answer those questions, you're going to be at least as prepared as you're going to be, as you could possibly be ahead of a storm. And really quick here, really important to know the timing of watches and warnings. So the watches are put up 48 hours before the possible impact of a storm, and warnings are put out 36 hours before the expected impact of a storm. So that's the difference between a watch and a warning. Obviously, the warning is a much higher level of urgency. And that's really what our public response should be. It's based on the watches and warnings, not specifically or strictly on anything else like the cone, the skinny black line, or other information of that sort. We update our forecasts every 6 hours. So it's important to stay updated with those forecasts. Yes, a forecast can change. The atmosphere changes, and we keep track of that all the time, and we make appropriate changes as needed. So don't fall into that, what I call an anchoring bias. So what am I talking about by anchoring bias? The anchoring is a tendency to anchor on one piece of information in decision making, not accounting for any future or past changes. For example, Hurricane Andrew, I remember, a lot of people were saying afterwards, oh yeah, I was in, that storm was forecast to go right down the Dade-Broward line. I can't tell you how many times I've heard that, but it ended up going, at the last minute it turned and it went down the Homestead. It wasn't really that sudden. It was a gradual shift, but I think that's a classic example of anchoring. We remember, oh wow, this storm is coming right down the county line. Understandably so, that caught our attention, right? It ended up shifting to the south. So yes, at that point in time, it certainly looked that way, but we need to make sure that we stay updated because things can and will change, even if it's slight, but those slight changes can be important. We covered the evacuation zones, so that obviously has to be a big part of our plan. If we live in one of those zones, a part of the plan has to involve where we're going to spend the storm. We have to assume if we're in an evacuation zone and a storm is threatening us, we may be ordered to evacuate. So you will not be able to spend the storm at your house. Betty covered the seasonal outlook quite well, so I'm not going to rehash that. But keep in mind, a near normal year, which the forecast indicates, doesn't mean it doesn't automatically assume everything will be normal. So normal only pertains to the number. It references the average number of storms that form in the Atlantic every year. So in an average year, we as you saw on Betty's slide, we average 6 hurricanes in the Atlantic. So an average year can still be devastating depending on where those storms hit. And that's something that we just don't know this far ahead of time. We don't have that skill. So don't assume near normal means everything is okay, no problems. That's not what that near normal means. So it's really about using that seasonal forecast as a reminder that we are at hurricane season. It's June 1. And also remembering that hurricanes bring a variety of threats, but each storm is different. Remember, let's not base our preparation too much on past experience. All right, any questions before we wrap up? Thank you very much. Have a great rest of your day and stay safe. Oh, I'm sorry, we have one question. You barely got it in right before the...
We're on east of Dania.
East of, okay?
Yeah, and so we're in a evacuation zone.
Okay.
But last year I stayed there, so one level. Everybody left and they kept checking with me. So my question is, I would like to wait till I hear a storm surge before I move.
Those stores, you mean you want to wait to hear a storm surge warning?
Yeah.
That's actually a good point because we actually do have. I mentioned it here in this slide as well. We in addition to the hurricane watches and warnings, we have specific storm surge watches and warnings, which have the same timeline. So the storm surge watch means 48 hours before, or you're within 48 hours of a potential storm surge threat area or impact. Then the warning means you're already within 36 hours of an expected impact somewhere in that warning area. Exactly where, however, we really won't be able to tell you with a high level of confidence till it gets really, really close. And that's the thing, we have to prepare for something that we're not totally certain about. That's just the state. Exactly. You can't outrun it. That's why there's that safety margin built in, not because we want to just cover ourselves, but because we understand the very the nature of the beast here, which is that even a very slight change in the track of the storm, that's well within the forecast error or well within the level of noise, if you will, can still make a big difference in who gets the worst part of the storm. So it's about public safety at the end of the game. Yeah, well, yeah, the storm surge warnings are based on the expectation or at least the potential of at least 3 feet of flooding. Now, when we talk about storm surge and we talk about actual flooding levels, that's not taking into account wave action on top of the surge. So yeah, the tide level, the tide rises 3 or more feet, let's say 6 feet, for example. That doesn't include the waves that are on top that are easily a couple or several feet higher and pounding and just, hitting, moving on shore and coming in contact with buildings and structures. That's really what does the damage, is those pounding waves. So that's, again, so the surge is not strictly just about how high the water it could get, but the force of the water, the movement of that water and waves on top.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
More questions, let's ask them to meet you at your table.
Yes. I will be over there. I'll be at my table. Please come by. I'll be more than happy to answer your questions in more detail one-on-one. So, thank you.
Thank you so much, Robert. And thank you, Robert. And next up, we have Chris from Florida Advocates. So once you have the damage, he's going to help you take care of it.
Good afternoon, Dania Beach. My name is Chris Tecito. I'm the managing attorney with Florida Advocates, a private law firm representing homeowners in their claim against their homeowner's insurance carrier for unpaid or underpaid claims. Unfortunately, I'm the face you don't want to have to see after a hurricane, because if you see me, that means your insurance company is jerking you around. And if there's anything you can take from my quick little spiel today, if there's anything you can remember, just remember these 4 words: we sue insurance companies. Now, many people often think, well, can I afford to hire a lawyer to sue my insurance company? Am I going to have to pay a lot out of my recovery? And the answer generally is no, because in the state of Florida, there is a statute which says if you have to sue your own insurance company and you prevail, they must pay your attorney's fees and costs separately from your recovery. So we would not take from your recovery. And this encourages us to fight, and it gives us the resources and the ability to keep fighting for your claim, because we know that we're not set on a fixed percentage of your claim. Our fees are paid hourly and separately from the insurance company. So it behooves them to settle the claim, because those hours just keep adding up, and the longer the lawsuit goes, the more money they owe your attorney. The other thing is that these cases are handled on a contingency basis, which means we don't get paid unless you get paid. If the case ends up going south, we tell you, and we absorb our own costs. You don't pay us anything. We like to think that we're good case evaluators, so we try to make sure that this doesn't happen and we don't get into any litigation that we don't think we can win. A bit of advice that I'd like to impart on all of you is to, if you can afford it, if you're a homeowner, to buy a separate flood insurance policy. They're relatively inexpensive compared to your homeowner's policy, but the reason I'm saying you need this, even if you're not in a flood zone, is because your homeowner's policy will not cover you from damages due to rising water from a storm surge. And living in South Florida, we are all susceptible to storm surges. We're surrounded by water. So if I could give you a bit of advice, look into buying a separate flood policy if you can afford it, even if you're not required to because you're not in a quote-unquote flood zone. The other thing I'd like to advise is that when a storm's coming, of course, you want to secure your house as best as possible, but after you are done doing this, take pictures of your home, all angles, outside, inside, take pictures of your contents, do an inventory of your valuables, make sure that you have proof that you have secured your home and you have proof of your valuables in case you have to make a claim for loss, because the insurance company, if you've played my wheel of insurance company excuses in our back booth, you will see that they will come up with any excuse to deny or delay your claim. Insurance companies are in business to make money. They are not your good neighbor, they are not on your side, and you are not in good hands. Just remember that, okay? They want to make money, they want to take your premiums, they don't want to pay out. So just keep that in mind. The other piece of advice that I would like to offer you is, if you have a claim to make, always hire an independent public adjuster before you negotiate with the insurance company, because they will come in, they will inspect your damages, and they will maximize the amount that you are entitled to for your repairs and replacement costs. If you can't get anywhere after the public adjuster comes in, then that's when I come in. So go to the public adjuster first, and then come to me. I'd just like to say I'm really grateful for this opportunity to be here and to speak to you all. If you haven't visited our booth in the back, please come visit and play the Wheel of Insurance Company Excuses. No prizes to be won, just a lot of laughs to be had. And if you'd like to enter our raffle for a bottle of Gentleman Jack, you can do that as well. But please be advised, I'm right next to the BSO table, so I'm IDing everyone, because I do not want to get arrested for encouraging underage drinking. Thank you so much, and you all have a wonderful afternoon.
Wait, don't go, don't go. I guess I don't get an introduction. That's okay, I can do my own. My name is Dawn, and I am a veteran volunteer with Humane Society of Broward County. I am here this morning, or this afternoon, to give you some advice on how to prep your dog or your pet for a hurricane. A lot of times this subject is overlooked, but luckily society is changing and they're offering more information out there. So I'm just going to give you a few pointers. And I'm sure you're wondering about the fuzzy thing hanging on the podium. Her name is Sherlock. She is 5 years old. I adopted her from the Humane Society of Broward County. She was actually being used as a breeder dog, and somebody, when they were done with her, tossed her out on the streets, and somebody brought her to the shelter where I adopted her after losing my best friend in the whole wide world. So I'm going to start off with just the obvious. To successfully get through a hurricane with your pet, planning, planning, planning. That seems pretty obvious, but a lot of people don't realize that planning is different from a dog than a human being. You have to realize that when the supplies come in, they're generally thought of as supplies for people. So usually you're told to prep and have food for approximately 3 days. For an animal, we recommend that you have food and supplies for 2 weeks, at least. That gives the stores time to restock or rebuild and get this kind of thing to you. So this is something that you definitely want to have on hand, along with your hurricane supplies. I actually have a little corner where all our water is, our first aid kit is, candles, flashlights, etc. And I have a bag of dog food and a few cans of dog food. And I have her flea and tick medication for at least 2 months. Okay, which is essentially just 2 doses. The same thing for the heartworm medication. If you're not aware, here in Florida, mosquitoes are the state bird. Okay, forget the hummingbird, mosquitoes. Okay, and dogs get heartworm from mosquitoes. Obviously, when the water levels are high, mosquitoes start reproducing. So you want to make sure that you have your heartworm medication, again, for at least 2 months, so essentially 2 doses. What kind of paperwork do I have to have? Isn't the rabies tag good enough? No. You want to make sure that you have hard copies of your animal's health certificates, their certificate of rabies, and full vaccinations that are required by Broward County. You also want to have your registration, your tag. With Broward County, you get a little receipt, have that hard copy on as well. Irma was an interesting case. Initially, the Humane Society of Broward County set up a pet-friendly shelter in Tamarack at Millennium Middle School years back, and we used to be in charge of that program. We are no longer in charge of that program because the amount of shelters now that are available for pets have expanded. In Broward County, if you dial 211, you should be able to figure out where one of those would be. If you do go to a pet-friendly shelter, keep in mind that you have to have all of your animal supplies ready, okay? Blankets, food, like I said, all paperwork, a crate. No matter what type of animal you have to have some kind of temporary housing. This will not be provided to you. None of this will be provided to you. Also, most pet-friendly shelters will have a schedule of visitation if you don't get to stay with your animal. They may house humans and pets separately. Be aware of that. Okay. And also, any specialty medications that you have for your animal, then you want to definitely have 2 months ahead of time. That may be 60 pills or whatever. Okay, you want to make sure you bring that with you. Plan in advance. Know where that pet-friendly shelter is. Please never, 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 never leave your house with that poor animal in it with a hurricane coming. I know that sounds unthinkable, but I've been in the state for about 49 years, and I remember when I was a kid hearing stories of pets not making it through because people abandoned them. So if you are planning on leaving your home and going to a pet-friendly hotel, make sure you're familiar with the hotel, where it is, and what they require. But in general, during the hurricane season, you want to make sure that you have all the paperwork in a waterproof baggie or envelope or safe or whatever, so you have it just in case something happens. Yes? Yeah. A lot of people weren't aware, and I was surprised to find this out myself. And before I came here today, I reconfirmed who's in charge of this program. It is the Red Cross. And the Broward County Emergency Management Center is 211. You can always call them. You can always come to the Humane Society of Broward County's table, which is in the back corner on your way to lunch, and pick up a brochure. We have them in English and Spanish, and we have extras available if you want to take them with you and hand them out to whatever organization you're affiliated with. The point that this nice lady was making was last year in Irma, people showed up, and some of the shelters opened up last minute because there was so much of a need, which was awesome. But some turned people away, but they didn't have any information to offer. Woohoo! To offer people like, oh, we can't take you here, but here's a list of pet-friendly shelters. Same thing as a dog. The only exception is if the cat is on special medication, because I know cats are susceptible to some forms of disease, especially under stress. You want to bring 2 months supply. You do want to bring your own kitty litter box and your own kitty litter and your own way of disposing of it. No, I would say 2 to 3 days. I would be on the safe side a week. It depends on, I can't answer that because it would depend on the storm and the damage. But as a rule of thumb, I would say for that kind of thing, at least a week. Yeah, I mean, I would err on the side of caution because if you leave the shelter, you may have to go to another place. So you might want to bring at least 2 weeks. But like I said, that depends on the situation. Okay? If you have a small animal, it's the same thing. No matter what pet you have. I know I saw on the news, we saw iguanas and geckos and things like that, the more exotic pets coming in. The rule of thumb is bring everything you need because it will not be supplied. Yeah, they may have cots for you to sleep on, but they're not going to have dog beds or crates. They're going to have food, maybe snacks or real food, but not dog food or not cat food. So it is your complete responsibility to provide everything you need. And there will have to be an understanding that you're going to have to abide by their rules. Abide by their rules. Okay? But I mean, in planning, you have to do this ahead of time. When the storm is coming, when we're on a warning or a watch, it's not the time to be doing this. The time is before. What you need to be doing when we're under a watch or warning is getting those things together and making a decision as to whether or not you're staying or going. So that's why I say plan, plan, plan. And just a caveat, we're not affiliated, Humane Society of Broward County is not affiliated, but society is taking into account what animals need. So you can even get guides from Pet Supermarket, Pet Smart. FEMA has information you can order online. Take advantage of the vendors that are here today because a lot of our information will include animal-specific prep for the hurricane. So I thank you for your time today. And please stop by the Humane Society of Broward County. We have a raffle for a nice little doggy gift box or gift basket. And we have, like I said, those ever important brochures. The brochures have what you need and telephone numbers and online resources that you can go to. Okay? Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
So that wraps up our speaking portion. We'd like to thank all of our sponsors today: the City of Dania Beach, Bass Pro Shops, Costco, Florida Advocates, Florida Home Improvement Associates, FPL, Iton Insurance, Memorial Healthcare System, Storm Tight Windows, Waste Management, and West Track Marinas and Harbortown Marina. Again, thank you all for attending our expo. It is still going on for another hour. There is still Panera in the back.